And second of all, to follow up what Lisa said, 1963 is also a very important anniversary elsewhere in the world. It's actually 50 years since the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And why is it that in America they remember such a national shame? Why do they remember that every year, and why do we not remember Coldstore? Because in America they take that event and they use it to remind them every year both of the horrendous depths that humanity can stoop to, and also of the greatest, loftiest ideals that we can aspire to. Human dignity, respect, justice. And for us, Operation Coldstore is the same thing. For us, I believe in the future we will remember it both for the depths and the heights. So instead of talking about my chapter, I think I'm just going to answer the basic 3 questions which I always get about Operation Coldstore and about merger and about all the things that happened in 1963. And those questions are very simply, why did merger happen? Why did Operation Coldstore happen? And were the detainees really communists? Now, why did merger happen? In fact, this was very unlikely in 1961 because after Malayan independence, after Federation independence in 57, the Tunku was growing less and less keen on bringing Singapore back into Malaya. Because of course, as we all know, Federation politics is based on racial voting blocks, and bringing all the Chinese back into Malaya, into the Federation, would have disrupted his own political base. So it's pure politics, plain and simple. So he did not want Singapore. Until 1961, and then suddenly he changed his mind. What happened in 1961 that changed the Tunku's mind? In a nutshell, the PAP did not do well in its first 2 years in government. In particular, its first year. As Lisa has mentioned, they were in a rush, they were revolutionaries, they were in a hurry, they changed everything. But they were very inexperienced. Let's not forget, the only job Lee Kuan Yew has ever had in government is that of a minister. He had 0 experience when he became Prime Minister. So it's not surprising the PAP really struggled that first year. They threw out a lot of policies, they made a lot of mistakes, they actually cancelled their whole labour policy after a whole year of, some of my friends here, our fellow detainees, the trade unionists, they have been working on it a whole year. At the end of it, the PAP cabinet threw the whole thing out. So there was a lot of unhappiness within the party. But the PAP leadership compounded this by refusing to admit their mistakes. They refused to admit that anything was wrong. They were insufferably arrogant and smug. And that's a quote from the British. The British found the PAP cabinet insufferably arrogant and smug, and they said you need to be more humane and have a more understanding style of leadership, and Lee Kuan Yew refused. So you have these mistakes, you have this arrogance, they were refusing to listen to experts in their own party. But most of all, and I think the worst thing, is they moved away from the promises they had been elected on. And most importantly of all those promises was their pledge to release all the political detainees. You will remember in 56 and 57, the colonial government with Lim Yew Hock arrested a lot of the political activists in Singapore, right? And the PAP campaigned explicitly saying we will release these people. And then when, after the PAP won the election, Lee Kuan Yew went to Lim Chin Siong, he went to Fong Swee Suan, that whole group, and he said, I promise you I will release them. But apart from releases in 59, by early 1960, no one was being released. So the PAP membership kept going to Mr. Lee and saying, why aren't you releasing the detainees? You promised to release the detainees. Why are you not fighting for the release of detainees? And this was the biggest issue. So the question is, why is this so important? Well, you have to remember, colonial Singapore was a very discriminatory place. Very discriminatory. From the 1930s onwards especially, right, the colonial government exercised extreme discrimination, especially if you were Chinese educated, Chinese speaking, and if you were poor. First the colonial government in the 30s, then the Japanese in the 40s, and then the colonial government again from 1945 onwards. Singapore was very discriminatory, it was very unfair. And so our friends were fighting for a more equal, more meritocratic, fairer Singapore. This was the big issue for them. And in 1956, despite all the achievements of the PAP, the colonial government, despite all the achievements of the political left, of the trade unionists, the colonial government was able to freeze all this in its tracks. They were able to completely destroy Singapore's incipient civil rights movement, a multiracial, multi-ethnic civil rights movement. How? By using detention against all its leaders. So the left, the progressive left, realized it doesn't matter what your achievements are in the political field. If the colonial government can simply come and arrest all of you, what does it matter what you achieve, what laws you pass, if the colonial government can simply arrest all of you? And this is why detainees, the issue of detention was so important to them. And that is why, in their minds, colonialism, oppression, its main manifestation in Singapore was detention, was the use of detention, was the detention law. And that was why they campaigned specifically for the law to be in the hands of a locally elected, locally responsible, democratically responsible representative government. It's important to note they didn't campaign to get rid of the laws. They said the laws, okay, if the laws are what the people want, that's fine, but they must be controlled by a democratic government. And that is why the issue of detainees was so important. But Lee refused, he refused to pursue this matter, right? But because his own party would not support him, he turned to the Malayan Communist Party for support. He struck secret deals with the communists to support him. And then he lost the Homeland by-election and the Anson by-election, and he realized, actually, the Malayan Communist Party is useless. They have no influence in Singapore, either that or they're unwilling to help me, I don't know why, but he realized that he could not rely on the MCP. And the British also did not want a progressive left party to take power, but they could not intervene in the democratic process in Singapore without being accused of trying to rig the whole democratic decolonization process. So Lee needed something to campaign on. He needed to go to the 1963 election with something in hand saying, look Singapore, I promised and I delivered. But what could that be? The economy was taking a long time to turn around, crime was getting worse, housing would take years to build, but the one issue he could deliver straight away, that he could control, that was universally popular in Singapore, was merger. And so he resolved, I will make merger happen, and then I can go to the election, campaign on the basis of merger, and say, look Singapore, you should re-elect me because I delivered what all of you wanted. But, here's the big but. The British wanted merger, right? But the Tunku does not want merger. So Lee has to go to the Tunku and tell them, look, there's a massive communist conspiracy in Singapore, and if you don't merge with Singapore, Singapore will become a Cuba on your doorstep, a source for instability. And the British also went to the Tunku and basically bribed him by saying, if you merge with Singapore, if you take on Singapore, if you protect our naval base in Singapore, we will give you North Borneo and Sarawak. And so after a lot of negotiation, a lot of pleading, a lot of back and forth, the Tunku agreed to merge. But all this was done in secret. When the Tunku got up in May 1961 to say, sooner or later we should have this closer association, only the British and the PAP cabinet knew what he meant. The rest of the public simply said, oh, the Tunku's been saying that since 1955, what's new? But a month later, news leaked that merger was happening, and immediately everyone erupted in surprise and shock. People said, wait a moment, right? You're going to completely change our country, our constitution, you're going to turn us into Malaysians, and you never even told Parliament, you never consulted us. What is this? This is not democracy, this is not government. This is some secret deal in a smoky back room. So people demanded answers. What is Malaysia? Is Singapore simply going to trade one colonial master, the British, for another, the Federation government? What on earth is merger? And they wanted answers. And the PAP backbenchers, the trade unionists, the activists, the PAP membership demanded answers. This is going to change all our lives, and you won't even tell us what's happening. But rather than face his party, Lee chose to purge his party of the people who opposed him. And all of them left in July 1961, and in August they formed the Barisan Socialists. Now, the Tunku, of course, was terrified of the Barisan. He told the British, you know, they have incredible organizational skills, and the man he was most terrified of was Lim Chin Siong. He talked about this inspirational, talismanic presence, Lim Chin Siong. One word from Lim Chin Siong and all the Chinese will rise up against me. So he said, if you want merger, you must arrest all of them. And that is where the origin of Operation Coldstore comes from. It is part of the deal to create Malaysia. The Tunku demanded arrests. Now the British had a problem because they said, well, these people are not communists. We don't have any evidence against these people. We can't just go and arrest them. We have a lot of problems because in 1959, the British had been hit by colonial scandals in Kenya and Nyasaland, which today is Malawi. So their reputation around the world was of this evil imperialist master. And the British conservative government said, if we go and just arrest these people without evidence, we will lose the next election. Funny how democracy has an effect on governments to, you know, make them do the right thing. So the British said, we can't arrest these people, we have no evidence. Now Lee Kuan Yew, of course, said, oh, you want to arrest these people, fine. But I don't want to take responsibility. If you arrest them before Malaysia is created, everyone will blame me like they blame Lim Yew Hock. And look at Lim Yew Hock today, his alliance party is, you know, it's a shell of his former self. No one wants to vote for them. So I cannot take responsibility, so we should have arrests after merger. And the Tunku got angry and actually called him up to KL and scolded him and said, no, you will have arrests before merger, or I will forget about merger and you can have Singapore to yourself and lose the next election for all I care. So Lee Kuan Yew, of course, was forced to agree. Of course, then when he went back to the British, he told the British, oh yeah, I changed my mind, you know, I thought we should have arrest before merger. Yeah, so I went and I convinced the Tunku and he agreed. Of course, the British then, you know, talked to the Tunku and they found the real story. So, here's the problem. The British say, we can't have arrests unless we have evidence. And there's no evidence. So the Tunku and Lee told Special Branch of Federation Singapore to come up with evidence. And they worked and they came up with a paper which they gave to the British. And Selkirk, the commissioner, the British commissioner, looked at it and said, this is ridiculous. But okay, you know, we'll be fair, we'll give it to our professionals, and he gave it to MI5. Right? He gave it to the head of MI5 in Singapore to evaluate. And the head of MI5 looked at this paper, read through it, and wrote a report that basically said, all this evidence is a load of rubbish. He said it was basically entirely surmise. It was just speculation. There were no facts. He noted 4 main deficiencies in this paper. He said that in spite of intensive investigations, no evidence has been obtained of Communist Party directions to open fund workers. No evidence has been obtained. Number 2, he said that just because you have the same goal as the communists does not make you a communist. Right? We all want Singapore's independence, we all want merger with Malaysia. That doesn't make us communists. The third thing he said was that Special Branch are very highly trained individuals. It is inconceivable that such a massive communist conspiracy exists in Singapore and we have no idea. You know, okay, sure, maybe a conspiracy can exist, but Special Branch would have picked up something. If it was as big as you say it is, Special Branch would have picked up something, but we have nothing. And fourth, he noted that this Communist United Front that was described in the Special Branch paper was so broad, it basically labeled everyone who was unhappy with the PAP government as a communist. So he described, you know, individual ambition, industrial grievance, Chinese nationalism, people with housing problems, you know, peasants who've been thrown off the land, students who, you know, can't go to school anymore. All these problems, all of these people in this paper were labeled communists. And so he concluded that the part played by the Communist Party of Malaysia in this process is not known and can merely be surmised, but it can be stated with some confidence that whether or not the Barisan could obtain power constitutionally, there is no Communist Party organization in Singapore capable of assuming political power in its own right. So let me get this straight. Let me say this. Were the Barisan and other detainees of Operation Coldstore part of a communist conspiracy? No. No, no, no. So if there was no evidence, why was Coldstore carried out? Well, you recall the Tunku said, if no Coldstore, if no arrest, no Malaysia. And the British wanted to ensure their base was under the control of a friendly pro-Western Federation government. And Lee Kuan Yew wanted his political opposition neutralized, right? And the Tunku wanted the Borneo states. So somehow they have to find an excuse. They have to find some reason for Operation Coldstore. And that happened December 8th, 1962, when the Brunei Rebellion broke out. And suddenly they have this excuse because there's a violent rebellion in British maritime Southeast Asia, and so they can say, oh, as a precaution against the violence spreading, we arrested other people. And now they were helped by the fact that the Barisan, out of principle, released a statement supporting the rebellion. And of course, the Barisan had done that many times before. They supported the violence, anti-colonial violence in Aden, in Cyprus, in South Africa, in Irian Jaya, and nothing had ever happened to them. In fact, the last one, Irian Jaya, the PAP had also supported it. So when they released that statement, right, it was for them a matter of routine and a matter of principle. As Lim Chin Siong said at the time, you can't stop being anti-communist when you know someone's going to arrest you. That's just being a hypocrite. So they released that statement, and immediately the British and the Federation and the PAP grabbed it and said, look, the Barisan are supporting violent revolution, violent subversion in Brunei. We have an excuse to arrest them. But of course, the fact is the Sarawak United People's Party condemned the violence and the British arrested them. And then the socialists in the Federation didn't say anything about the violence and the Federation arrested them. So really anything the Barisan would have done didn't matter. What mattered is the Brunei Rebellion broke out and now they had an excuse to arrest the Barisan. And so that's why Operation Coldstore was approved, right? And when Selkirk, the commissioner, wrote to London for approval to conduct the arrest, you know what he talked about in his telegram? Not some evidence of violence or communist conspiracy. He spent the bulk of his telegram saying, look, there is no way now we can deny the Federation government these arrests without them saying that we are acting in bad faith and backing out of merger. If we want Malaysia, we have to approve the arrest. And he goes on about this. And then at the end of it, he appends 6 lines at the bottom of the page saying, oh, I have some new evidence, that Lim Chin Siong has not renounced violence. And if you look at the quote, it's taken so far out of context, right? Lim Chin Siong is talking about something else entirely, and Selkirk uses it and says, oh, he supports violence. So the whole point of Coldstore, right, was to eliminate this political opposition, and they found that excuse. And Coldstore was scheduled for 16 December 1962. But of course, as we know, Coldstore didn't happen the 2nd February. And what happened? Well, the problem was, on the very day, the very night that Coldstore was supposed to happen, Lee Kuan Yew inserted 15 names into the arrest list. And the British and the Federation said, who are these people? Why are you arresting innocent, why are you adding the names of innocent people to the arrest list? And he said, well, the fact is that after Coldstore happens, I'm worried that my political popularity will fall. So I need to arrest these people so that at the next election, there is no alternative to the PAP. So the Tunku got angry and he said, you can't manipulate these arrests for your own political purposes. A bit ironic that, but the Tunku was very angry. And of course Lee said, no, my political survival depends on this. And both men refused to back down, so the whole thing collapsed. So everyone was left stewing, and Lee, went off in a tantrum, and he went to Cameron Highlands to play golf with Norodom Sehano. And so for 2 months, everyone just sat around waiting, and and as the British went back and forth, shuttle diplomacy, and finally they gave Lee Kuan Yew 2 concessions. The first is that the post-arrest press statement would say that, that would refer to Malaysia. This would allow Lee to say that, oh, merger was dependent on the arrest, so my hands were tied. I didn't want the arrest, but we want merger, so we got to have the arrest, so what am I supposed to do? Right? That's a major concession. But even worse, they let him insert 3 of the 15 names back into the arrest list. 3 people they knew were completely innocent, had nothing to do with any of this political opposition that they were worried about, and put it back into that list for his own political gain. So, Operation Coldstore then went ahead on the morning of 2nd February, and you know the rest. So let me make 2 conclusions, 2 very important points in my conclusion. The creation of Malaysia was a political act. It was not about reunifying a divided Malayan people. Of course, the government sold it as such, but the creation of Malaysia was a political act. It was Lee Kuan Yew's and the PAP's unpopularity that drove the timing of merger. It provided the opportunity for merger. Without it, merger might never have happened. And for Lee and the PAP, merger, the Ho Pa merger was an issue on which they could campaign on and win the 1963 election. For the British, merger was about protecting their strategic and political interests in Singapore, particularly the naval base. And so they convinced the Tunku to agree to merger by promising him the Borneo territories and promising him that Singapore would be much more controllable and stable and after the creation of Malaysia. And his condition was the arrest of Singapore's progressive left, the arrest of Singapore's political opposition. So throughout all this, the calculations were chiefly political. And my second point was that there was never a security case for Operation Coldstore. To this day, the ISD will tell you that Operation Coldstore was carried out to stop a communist conspiracy. I quote a Ministry of Home Affairs statement of 23 September 2011, which says that the detainees were detained not for their political beliefs, but because they had involved themselves in subversive activities which posed a threat to national security. This is simply not true. The UK has now declassified almost all their documents relating to Operation Coldstore and merger. So we can see the same documents, the same evidence, the same cases that are in the Special Branch and now ISD archives and New Phoenix Park. And this evidence is very clear. There was never any evidence that the Operation Coldstore detainees were engaged in any communist conspiracy. And I'll say this again, in case the microphone malfunctioned, or the cameras didn't capture it, or you guys didn't hear it the first time. You're going to take out your phones and record me, go ahead. I will say this one more time, loud and clear. I want to make this very, very clear. Special Branch and the ISD does not have any evidence that the Operation Coldstore detainees were engaged in any communist conspiracy. To come back to what I started with, if we want to be a great country, if we want Singapore to have a great future, we need to remember Operation Coldstore. And we need to give justice to our friends here and remember the sacrifices that they went through. Thanks very much.